Welcome back, everybody. Hope you all having a blessed day. I went to go watch the first theatrical Star Wars release in the last seven years. Oh, Jesus. Okay, that's been a while. But regardless, went to go watch a Star Wars movie, and it was The Mandalorian and Grogu. Truth be told, I had very low expectations for this movie. In fact, I really wasn't all that excited for it. But you know what? I'm open-minded, so let's see what we are working with here. Not much. Our titular characters, Mando and Grogu, are the best part of the film. Shocker. This now confirmed father-son duo just go around the galaxy just trying to get bounties done so that they can make an honest living now, fighting the good fight. Another part of this film that I was pleasantly surprised by, or I guess more so glad to see, or appear actually, is the music. The music always is some of the best parts in any Star Wars film. Whether it be good or bad, the music is usually always popping off on all cylinders, even if it doesn't need to. So nice to see that that's still consistent in this movie. Also, the practical and special effects were pretty awesome, and while at time to times they were to dip more with the CGI, the parts with practical sets and practical effects were pretty spot on awesome. And especially because I went to go see this in Dolby, and it was advertised for a second that Dolby was the way to see this film, it was pretty pleasant to watch the intended vision of this movie being shot for Dolby. Kind of like how some directors like to use IMAX only, but just with different cameras. So it was pretty to look at the very least. And finally, I do think that the Jabba cousins were a cool threat, and they were just an okay obstacle. Again, looking at them for too long, it just you can kind of see where some of the budget can dip from time to time with them, and especially with other characters too. And I do want to say that because it's called Mandalorian and Grogu, I thought it was just a tagline to give them more of an opportunity for them to get more tickets out because Grogu was so popular. But no, Grogu actually has some significance to the story and actually does help Mando out when he should. Alright, and that's everything that I actually liked about the movie. Now, what didn't I like? Or more so, the problems with this film? Well, we're going to get into those problems right now. The main issues with this movie is the fact that it goes on for way too long, and I thought it was just me feeling the pacing and length of this movie, but no. People in my theater fell asleep about halfway through. I could hear them snoring. I genuinely was shocked. It was pretty funny, but also just realizing that, yeah, this movie is just way too long for the general viewing audience. And a lot of the side characters, other than the Hutts, were extremely forgettable and pretty boring. Even the new bounty hunter that gets introduced halfway through doesn't get a single line of anything. He just shows up and does karate and just captures the Mandalorian. It's just so disappointing when you're in a Star Wars movie. You have to say something to be remembered. I mean, heck, Boba Fett said 6 lines in the original trilogy, and he's one of the most famous characters in all of Star Wars. Just saying. But my biggest issue with this movie is, shocker, the script. Entire sequences and choices were made for the sake of just allowing the plot to move along, and you can really tell by halfway through that this entire movie felt like it was the first part of the new season of Mandalorian, but then they got greenlit to make a whole movie instead of just releasing a new season on Disney+. And you can truly feel that when the middle chunk of this movie is essentially just fetch quest after fetch quest, which becomes rather mundane and dramatically slows down the plot of the film. But overall, well, no, hold on one second. And the choices in this movie were so bad, it makes you wonder how Mandalorian and Grogu weren't genuinely dead. I'll admit that some of these criticisms are very nitpicky. I will admit that, but the more that these nitpicks were stacking on top of each other, the more you began to see just how much the plot would drag, which makes for a longer runtime. Jeez, my words are slurring there. Longer runtime, and just feeling more convoluted to get from one location to the next when it shouldn't have to be so complicated for a rather simple adventure with Mandalorian and Grogu. Overall, Mandalorian and Grogu was about as much as I was expecting, to be honest. My expectations were low. They were surpassed, I guess. It was pretty to look at. Nice to see Mando and Grogu again, but just everything else compiling from the story to the choices and overall just feeling like in an official season 4 of The Mandalorian, which how much the plot drags. And I originally had a score down for this movie, but after thinking about it, I think I'm going to be a little harsher. I'm going to give Mandalorian and Grogu a 4.5 out of 10. Maybe should have let a decade pass before you brought a Star Wars movie back. I knew we weren't ready yet. Alright, you made it to the end. I'll admit, I was pretty hard on this review, but man, you really, when you're like me and you just see the inconsistencies with the writing, it just becomes too hard for you to ignore, especially when you look back on what was there. Also, there were a lot of other issues I didn't want to, there were a lot of other issues I didn't get to touch on, but that would be making the video too long, and I'm not really wanting to give this movie more of my time because I forgot a good portion of it already, so I don't want to put my own feelings there too much without giving good criticism. But regardless, thank you guys so much. Hope y'all have a blessed day.